What's up everyone, I'm the one and only Zage, and today we'll be talking about the Dark King Rayleigh and his strength current day and in his prime days. If this sort of content interests you, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as it would help push this in the algorithm, and your support as always is much appreciated. Silver's Rayleigh, also known as the Dark King, is one of the strongest in the series, and his presence and importance has always been very significant. He was once the right-hand man of the Pirate King and the vice captain of the Roger Pirates and Luffy's teacher. Rayleigh is quite literally made out to be like a mythical man and a legend that you only hear about in stories. The shock of strong individuals like Jinbei and even Blackbeard whenever they're in the presence of Rayleigh speaks to his reputation and standing in the world. Rayleigh doesn't have a devil fruit, but is exceptionally skilled with Haki and can use all three types. He has the most advanced level of armament Haki, that Haki which destroys internally. It's not 100% confirmed, but he might also have advanced observation Haki to see the future as well, and should be able to infuse himself with Conqueror's Haki. This is because Conqueror's Haki can't be trained to grow stronger. It only grows stronger as the user grows stronger. The process in which one infuses themselves with Conqueror's Haki is Ryo, or Haki flow. Since Rayleigh is among the handful of the very strongest in the world and can also use Ryo, he should be able to use advanced Conqueror's Haki as well. We are first introduced to Rayleigh's strength in his fight against the Navy Admiral Kizaru. Kizaru had initially come to Sabaody in order to casually capture the rookies that harmed the Celestial Dragons, but when Rayleigh intervened, he had to take the situation seriously. We know for a fact that Kizaru took things seriously, as he had to fight to save face with the Celestial Dragons. Even though Kizaru is an admiral and one of the strongest in the world, he would still need to make preparations in order to capture Rayleigh. Garp reaches a similar conclusion and shares a similar sentiment, saying that the Marines would lose countless lives if they go after him carelessly. Rayleigh and Kizaru begin to fight, and they fight equally in the time that they fought. However, towards the end of the fight, Rayleigh shows signs of fatigue and says that the years have slowed him down. This is also the first time in many years that Rayleigh has even held a sword, so he might even have rusty swordsmanship in general. Although Kizaru and Rayleigh most likely didn't use their full strength in this fight, it still portrays their attack power specifically as comparable to each other. Throughout the entirety of the fight, Rayleigh was matching the power of Kizaru's sacred sword, and the only reason Rayleigh was beginning to lose out towards the end of the fight was due to his decline in stamina. So even though Kizaru would have won the fight had it continued, it'd take tiring out Rayleigh in order to get the win. When Rayleigh protected the Straw Hats from the Marines after the time skip, Sentomaru says that there was nothing he could do against a man who could stop Kizaru. So at least in terms of raw power, Rayleigh, even in his old age, doesn't seem to be far off from the likes of Kizaru. For an idea of what this means, Kizaru is so strong that he is confident in his own ability to stop both Kaido and Big Mom. That's not to say that he could actually do it, as confidence alone isn't definitive proof that he can, but at least he could put up a decent fight against them, as the only reason why Akainu objects is due to the unknown powers of Wano, and not that stopping Kaido and Big Mom is too much for Kizaru. He was also able to effortlessly evade a weakened Whitebeard's attack while off guard and also easily counter him. Garp even questions whether Rayleigh is too big of a threat for the Navy to deal with at the same time as preparing a war against Whitebeard. This is a big statement, as the Navy also brought the Warlords to fight the Whitebeard pirates, and the two powers balanced the four Yonko crews. But with just the addition of Rayleigh to the Whitebeard situation, it would cause massive problems for the world government. With all that said though, Rayleigh does admit that given his old age, he wouldn't be able to defeat the current Blackbeard, who has a bounty of 3.9 billion. So we know for a fact that Rayleigh isn't on the Yonko and Kizaru level of strength. However, in his prime Rayleigh is a different beast, as he wouldn't be held back by the poor stamina that he has in his old age. Some people have this misconception that old people like Whitebeard, Garp and Rayleigh haven't declined in strength or have even gotten stronger, and they refer to this SBS statement from Oda. However, all Oda means by this is that in his story, he wants to have the old folk remain strong, not that they don't get weaker at all. Essentially, the idea behind this is that in the real world, Oda doesn't like the fact that some young people disrespect old people for their age. So in his fantasy, he wants to have old people maintain some of their strength. That's not to say that they don't get weaker at all or have gotten stronger since their younger days. There are statements made by old characters or about old characters that imply that they aren't as strong as they used to be, so this interpretation is just flat out incorrect. In the case of Rayleigh specifically, there is a statement from the databook that says there is no shade over the Dark King's power, which has been interpreted by some to mean that Rayleigh hadn't lost any of his raw power. I also considered that this could be true, but after checking with a credible translator, that interpretation in fact is inaccurate, and all that no shade means here is that Rayleigh's strength is undeniable. His strength can't be denied, and that Rayleigh is strong. That's basically all it means, so I won't be going with the former interpretation. There are a few ways of trying to gauge Rayleigh's strength in his prime. The first being that Rayleigh implied against Kizaru that had the years not slowed him down, he'd be able to help the Straw Hats from the Pacifista. Kizaru takes notes of this and says that Rayleigh saying that makes him look bad. This doesn't necessarily mean that Rayleigh definitely would have been able to fend off Kizaru and help the Straw Hats at the same time, but it does imply that Rayleigh is at least a little stronger. Rayleigh's reputation is also so great that he was able to mediate the situation between Blackbeard, Hancock and the Marines. This implies that Blackbeard allowed for Rayleigh to control the situation and didn't challenge him because of his perception of Rayleigh's prime strength, which he did in fact see firsthand being on Whitebeard's crew. So this portrays that prime Rayleigh is stronger than current Blackbeard as of chapter 1059. As of this recording though, with all the information currently available, prime Rayleigh's strength caps off at young Shanks and Mihawk at the time of their duels. Now this may sound crazy at first, thinking that Shanks and Mihawk in their 20s would be stronger than prime Rayleigh, but hold your horses because it will all make sense by the end. It is stated in the Virakar databook that after losing the presence of strong foes, Mihawk joined the Warlords. It's also stated that Mihawk looks forward to the day that he will be challenged by a swordsman that surpasses his rival Shanks. In other words, Mihawk gave up looking for swordsmen to challenge and waited for someone that surpasses Shanks because there was no swordsman in the world apart from himself that was stronger than Shanks. This would include Big Mom and Rayleigh at the time of their duels, as if Rayleigh was still stronger than Shanks and Mihawk at that time, there'd be no reason why Mihawk gives up looking for swordsmen to challenge if Rayleigh is still the strongest swordsman in the world. And for those that may say, well, Rayleigh is retired at this point. Yes, he's retired from piracy, but you don't retire from swordsmanship. You know, you're always still going to be a swordsman. Rayleigh is a retired pirate now, but he is forced into battles due to certain situations and he's still a swordsman. So being retired as a pirate doesn't mean that Mihawk wouldn't look out for Rayleigh if Rayleigh was still the strongest swordsman at that time. Narratively, this just does not make sense. Shanks and Mihawk's duels were at least 12 years ago, before Shanks lost his arm. At that time, Rayleigh would be at least 66, if not younger. Sengoku was also in his prime in the same era as Rayleigh, and he was still an admiral 16 years ago. Big Mom also had her prime strength when she was 68, so it's likely that Rayleigh was in his prime at the time of Mihawk and Shanks' duels. Since it's not 100% confirmed though, I'll give a couple of interpretations for where Rayleigh would rank towards the end. But for now, we'll continue with the interpretation that Rayleigh was in his prime during the duels of Mihawk and Shanks. Since the days of those legendary duels, it is debatable whether or not Shanks is stronger than his younger self with 2 arms. I touch upon this in my first Shanks vs Mihawk video, so for more information on this, go check that out after this, but they're probably comparable in strength regardless, but personally I'd consider current day Shanks to be a little stronger, as the 6 years since Meter Luffy was his rise to being a Yonko, so by then he would have mastered the sword with his least dominant arm and at least returned back to his former strength. I know this Shanks part has a lot of headcanon to it, but unfortunately there isn't any concrete information to go off to establish a true difference between these 2 versions of Shanks. So prime Rayleigh is definitely on the Yonko tail of strength, but based on the narrative of Mihawk and Shanks' legendary duels, he's weaker than young Shanks and is arguably stronger or weaker than current day Shanks, depending on your interpretation of how Yonko Shanks compares to his younger self with 2 arms. One Piece is still an ongoing series, so Oda can be flexible on whether or not he wants to have his characters contradict the narrative of other characters' strengths. For example, Kaido's narrative currently is being the strongest and that no one in the world can beat him except for Joy Boy. Shanks was challenged by Kid and Killer, but they still consider Kaido to be the strongest. Kaido had a skirmish with Shanks and still believes that there's no one in the world that can beat him, despite acknowledging his strength to the point that he thinks about Shanks to represent Luffy's potential. With all that said, considering the narrative that supports Kaido being stronger than Shanks, is it still possible though that Shanks contradicts this narrative somehow with better feats against a stronger Blackbeard in the future? Most definitely. And some people already think that Shanks is stronger than Kaido, despite Shanks not actually having a real case against Kaido currently in the story. A similar thing could happen to Prime Rayleigh's scaling based on Zoro's strength progression in the story. It should come at no surprise that Zoro has strong parallels with Rayleigh, but the reason I mention this is because whenever the narrative portrays Zoro has become as strong as Prime Rayleigh, it could upscale Rayleigh, so that's just something to think about. Anyways, to sum everything up, based on what we know as of this chapter, chapter 1059, old Rayleigh would lose to those on the Yonko and Kizaru tier of strength. In his prime, Rayleigh is stronger than current Blackbeard, and depending on your interpretation of Shanks, Rayleigh would be weaker than Yonko Shanks if Shanks is as strong or stronger than he was with 2 arms. This would also mean that Kaido is stronger than Rayleigh as well, as he's currently portrayed to be stronger than Shanks. However, Rayleigh would most likely be stronger than Shanks and Kaido if current Shanks is a little weaker than his younger self. Now, for the last possible interpretation of Prime Rayleigh, if he started to decline in strength during Mihawk and Shanks' duels, it's likely in his prime he'd be stronger than they were at that time, and stronger than all the original Yonko that were introduced by Garp. With that said though, this is still subject to change with new information in the future, but this is what we have at the moment. Well, that's all for this subject. The Dark King's strength definitely needs more respect in the fandom, so hopefully this helped deliver on that. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed. I've been the one and only Zage, and until next time.